How's it going, guys? This is Jay here to break down the Friday, December 11th slate for you. I'm doing this pod solo, actually, so just like De La Soul said, it's just me, myself, and I, so bear with me here. Before I start this 11-game slate, I just want to remind you that the NBA All-Star voting is now open. I don't have to really tell you this, as I'm sure you saw, but Johnny O'Bryant did cross over Porzingis the other night pretty hard. And then a few nights later, he buried a corner three at the end of the shot clock. So just make sure to vote him in. Yeah, let's finally get the voting right this year for once. Now that that's out of the way, let's jump into this slate here. First game I got is Cavs at Magic. Cavs are favored by 3 with a total of 197. Biggest thing to look for in this game is J.R. Smith is currently questionable with an illness. He's not traveling with the team, but could fly on his own, which is probably the thing that I am most excited for tomorrow. Like JR on a private jet, going to a game late on his own time, like no coaches around. He could bring his whole posse with him on the plane. Like I'd rather watch that, have someone filming the jet ride than like the game itself, probably. But yeah, if he's out, I think Cunningham and Mo Williams would get a little additional minutes there. Kyrie Irving is still out, but he's supposed to return pretty soon. Actually, he's been looking better, on track to return before the holidays and whatnot. Iman Shumpert is on track to return soon as well. For cash in this game, really the main guy, as always, is LeBron, and he's on fire lately, averaging over 60 in his last 3. He's playing really heavy minutes, and I like him more if JR is ruled out in this game. Close game, so he's pretty high up there if you're going to spend on a top play. I think LeBron offers you that really nice floor in this game. And then the next play for cash is not really someone I would start my lineup with at all, but given this slate, it's really hard to kind of find a value play. There aren't that many cheap options. So Dellavedova, if JR is out, his price on FanDuel is 4,400 compared to 4,600 on DraftKings. So he's playing a lot of minutes, and his implied total on FanDuel is only 16, and he's averaged about 21 and a half FanDuel points his last 4, all pretty big minutes. So I think if JR is out, he'll have that safety of kind of guaranteed minutes. And I don't expect him to really do anything crazy and like make your team a top team or anything, but for salary relief, I think he's kind of a fine punt play given the slate here. Tournament-wise, I really like Kevin Love in this spot. He's 7,700 on FanDuel, and I love this matchup for him with Fry not being a typical post-up defender. And Love has been great in the post this year, so I think Love can exploit that matchup quite a bit. And the only thing wrong really is his price doesn't exactly scream value with the way he's been playing, and kind of LeBron picking up. But again, if JR is out, that's going to create more shots, and I think Love's in a pretty good spot here for tourneys, definitely. Let's go to the Magic side. The only injury really is still C.J. Watson, who hasn't really played with that calf injury, so he's considered doubtful. Cleveland plays at a really slow pace, which I'm sure Scott Skiles loves because he tries to play at that slow pace too. So I'm not like super high on these Magic players as I usually am. The 4 being Elfrid Payton, Tobias Harris, Vucevic, and Oladipo. But for cash, I still think there is some value here. I think Oladipo at 6,600 on DraftKings, I don't mind that in cash. Cleveland's 28th in defensive efficiency against shooting guards. And I really like Depot's matchup against Cleveland's second unit in this game. And I think he can pay off his price in this game. And the other guy I kind of lean cash out of the 4 is Elfrid Payton, 6,700 on DraftKings. And the slow pace doesn't really help him out, but I still think he'll be a great source of assists, obviously, in this game. And he's actually shooting a lot lately, which is really good to see. Doesn't mean he's shooting really well or anything. I don't think he ever really will get to that level, but it's nice to see him attempting a lot of shots to kind of bring his floor up with when he doesn't get double-digit assists. So he's shooting 16 field goal attempts on average in his last 3. I like the floor here, and this assists and steals will be there as well. So he's someone you can kind of target in cash games if you want to go that route. He's 6,700 on DraftKings and 6,900 on FanDuel. So not great or anything, someone I'm not really like putting in there right away, but he's still good value on this slate and someone you can go in cash. Tournament-wise, I'm more on Vucevic, being a double-double machine right now. I think he's borderline cash playable on DraftKings at 7K, and where you get bonus points for double-double, obviously. So 500 cheaper than FanDuel. So I think if you're going to go him in cash, I'd lean him on DraftKings and maybe explore other options at center on FanDuel with him being 7,500. Tobias Harris is an intriguing tourney option for me. 6,300 on DraftKings, 6,600 on FanDuel. So not like a great spot or anything at small forward. Someone I won't really have too many shares of. His ceiling is a bit limited, but he's capable of paying off his price. I just don't know, if his ceiling really wants you to get a lot of exposure to him. That does it for that game. Let's move on to the next one. I got Pistons at Sixers. Pistons are favored by 9, and the total is 193. And Philly is on a back-to-back. I'll start with the Pistons here. Cash-wise, it's tough. 9-point favorite isn't great or anything for the Pistons, and especially with Reggie Jackson, he hasn't been playing that many minutes. Steve Blake's been getting some burn and actually been playing pretty well. But I still kind of like Reggie Jackson in cash. He's 7,300 on both sites. I like this spot for him to kind of get his groove back. His minutes haven't been great lately, but he's still performed really well outside of the Charlotte game, which was an absolute disaster. So I'm not sure it's someone you kind of want to go in cash. I think he'll have a pretty relatively low ownership in cash to where you're not like missing a huge obvious play if you fade him in cash. But the price is solid, and I think his floor is really high. It's someone I generally like more than others. Philly leads the league in turnovers, so I think his floor is high here with assists. You should have no problem getting the basket. You should have no problem getting steals. So he's not my favorite value play, but he's someone that I definitely like a lot, and I absolutely love for tournaments. And then the other guy is obviously Andre Drummond, which is tough on this slate to kind of pay up. He's 9,500 on DK, 9,300 on FanDuel. But Philly is last in the NBA in defensive efficiency against centers. So I like Drummond. He should have no problem eating here in this spot, especially if Tyson Chandler's back and you can't really fall back on Len at your value center option. You have the option to kind of pay up for Drummond. Personally, I don't think I will be, just given the slate. It will be really hard to kind of fit him in there. I'd rather go a center around that 7K price range where there are a lot of them, but Drummond's certainly in a good spot here. And if you find value plays that you like at other positions, then I don't mind paying up for him in cash. And then obviously tournament, I think he's great, especially if he's a little bit under-owned due to price and other options and difficulty fitting him in. Other tournament plays really on this team are Marcus Morris and Ilyasova. Just with kind of how carelessly Philly is with the ball, I think Marcus could end up with the pretty decent line in scoring in transition, seeing wide open threes and whatnot. Ilyasova could have a nice rebounding game given, Philly's they're incapable of kind of shooting a high percentage. So those are two guys I won't really have too many shares of, but I think in this game, given the matchup and just the sloppiness of Philly, that they could produce pretty solid lines there. On the Sixers side, it's kind of a mess with the backcourt. We got Kendall Marshall is coming back, making his season debut from his knee injury. He's playing 16 minutes. So right now they have Tony Roten, TJ McConnell, Kendall Marshall, and Isaiah Cannon kind of all gunning for point guard, off guard minutes there. And that's a lot. And I know 2 of them are on 16-minute limits, but like we saw tonight, Thursday night, McConnell had like the best game of the season, which you just can't expect. So I think it's just not a great spot for any of these guys to go at all. I think you can just comfortably write them off in all formats. Cash-wise, really, this whole team, as usual, you can pretty much write off in cash. So tournament-wise, I think Okafor is an option. His price is soft. He's 6,400 on DraftKings and only 6,100 on FanDuel. So he played really well tonight, Thursday night. Looked great. I don't love the matchup, obviously, going against Drummond, foul trouble, and just difficult with that big body down low in the post. I do think he makes for a pretty nice tournament play at that price. And then Nerlens Noel, he's always a tourney play for me, but I'm not having too many shares of him. He just hasn't flashed any upside lately at all. He has a very soft price, and he has looked a little bit better lately, but I'm not really ready to jump on that train just yet right now. And then the other guy for some tournament exposure I can see is Bob Covington. His price is pretty terrible, obviously, for cash. It still hasn't really gone down with all these bodies back, but I think he's still kind of shown that upside even with his decreased minutes. So I imagine he'll have pretty low ownership, and at that price point, it'll kind of give you some unique lineups to work with. Kind of overpaying for Covington, if that makes sense. But they are on a back-to-back, and they have a couple more bodies as usual that they can kind of throw out there. So overall, I'm really, really low on the Sixers. Next game I got is the Heat at the Pacers. Pacers are favored by 5, and the total is 195.5. On the Heat side, we got Hassan Whiteside suffered an ankle injury last game, and he's considered questionable. So that's something that we'll obviously monitor tomorrow. Amari Stoudemire, I think, is just done, basically. He's doubtful, doesn't see the court anyways, even if he is active. So Dang is back. Luol Deng is back, but he came off the bench. I imagine he'll return to the starting lineup soon. I'm not sure if this will be the game, pushing Gerald Green back to the bench. So we'll see. He played 26 minutes off the bench last game, so that's something we'll monitor as well. Either way, for the Heat side, it makes me off both Deng and Gerald Green, obviously, in pretty much both formats. Cash-wise for this team, I'm not really on anyone. This isn't a great matchup for them, and their offense is really awful most of the time. So cash-wise, I think it's safe to not really go anyone on this team. Tournament-wise, obviously the status of Whiteside is big, but I think he's a fine tournament option. He's been really bad lately. He's played 5 games in a row under 30 minutes. He's questionable. His price on FanDuel is still $7,400. I think he'll likely have really, really low ownership, which I kind of like. It's a sneaky spot. Indy's not a good rebounding team at all. They're one of the worst, especially at the center position rebounding-wise. So I'll have some Whiteside exposure as long as he's playing for sure. Not much, but I think it's a pretty sneaky spot for him. 6,900 on DraftKings, and he's been really bad lately, so you can comfortably throw him out the cash consideration window. Another guy I like on this team for tournament is Bosch. 7,200 on DraftKings, which is pretty cheap for someone who still kind of has a pretty solid upside. He's coming off a terrible game, but it was a massive blowout, obviously, to the Hornets. So I still like him for tourneys. He did go for 21-11 earlier this season versus the Pacers. So the upside's absolutely there with this matchup. And then Dwayne Wade, 7K on DraftKings. I like that Indy plays at a fast pace, so I think that suits Wade well, kind of in transition and whatnot. And he's had a really high volume of shots recently, so I like him in a few tourney spots here. But again, I mean, it's tough to really go in on these Miami guys with the state their offense is in. And I'm pretty much off Dragic. Overall, his upside is very limited, and he's obviously very risky for cash and not a good matchup going against Hill. On the Pacers side, we got no injuries. Cash-wise, again, I'm not really on anyone. This is a really low total. Well, actually, it's pretty high considering it's versus the Heat, but the Heat are still a sound defensive team, and the pricing really just isn't great. I mean, Paul George is on fire. He just continues to crush every game. He's scored over 60 in his last 3 games, or 3 of his last 4, and it really seems like he goes over 60 almost every game. So he does have a very safe floor. Again, it's just a matter of how are you going to afford him. I do really like his floor a lot. It's very high. So I just think there might be better options for almost like 3K less at small forward that won't get you that high floor, but will get you a comfortable 33 to 36 points. So basically, if you're fading Paul George, you're kind of hoping he doesn't go for 60, I guess. But him and CJ Miles, they're just bombing threes lately like crazy. They're shooting so many. But Miami's really good at the perimeter, and they're allowing opposing teams to shoot just 32.3% from beyond, which is 4th best in the league. So for both these guys, it's not like a great spot, CJ Miles included, which kind of pushes me more tourney-wise for Miles, even though he's been playing really well. He's had some nice games lately, but I don't personally expect this to be one of them. with the good perimeter defense and a very, very slow-paced game. So George Hill, I think, just kind of lacks upside at this point. And then the rest of this team, Monte has been really terrible. Mahimi's matchup is obviously not good. Although I guess we'll monitor the status of Whiteside. I think Mahimi could garner tourney exposure, a nice sneaky play if Whiteside is ruled out. And then, so really it's mainly Paul George and then maybe some CJ Miles tournament exposure, but very small amount. Let's move on to the next game, probably my favorite game of the slate, the Warriors at Celtics. Warriors are favored by 7, and there's not a total as of now because Klay Thompson is still questionable for this game. So that's obviously a big thing to monitor. He's going to be a game-time decision, according to Luke Walton. From what I saw recently, his ankle's 70% healthy. So really, I know everybody's making this up to be a really big game, but they're undefeated. I have a difficult time seeing Klay Thompson playing in this one, just knowing that he's not 100%. I don't see the upside to it really long term the way their season is going. So I am probably going into this, at least the first half of the day, research wise, counting on him being out. Obviously, we'll keep you updated with our Twitter account, but for that case, I think Curry moves to tournament, and really everyone on this team I think is more tournament play, even though they're 7-point favorites still. For Curry, I think he's more tourney because they can put a lot of pressure on him, especially if Klay's out. It's one less person they can really set screens for. Boston's defense is pretty incredible with the way Brad Stevens has kind of taken charge of a defense that doesn't really have a guy outside of maybe Avery Bradley. Jay Crowder's good, but it's overall it has some guys that are like not solid defensively, but it's a great defensive team. So, a lot of them, they'll put pressure where they need to, and the Warriors offense is just designed a lot for at least Curry on screens. And I think it's difficult for them here, offensively to kind of get those screens wide open when Boston can really key in on Curry. And I think Isaiah Thomas on him, a lot of people are going to look at that and kind of say, you might be asking yourself like how someone who still has to legally ride in a car seat can D up Curry. But Isaiah's a really pesky defender. And this team knows, like they're well aware that Curry lives off screens. And I think it's kind of the right team to face Curry. They don't really commit too early to any pick and rolls, and they don't like over help on defense when there are screens that are set. They're a really solid team if you watch them a lot. And so I think Curry will struggle a little bit more than usual in this one. And then there's also the fact, obviously, outside of Isaiah Thomas, if he does torch Isaiah, which obviously there's a good chance that they have Avery Bradley they can stick on him. Jay Crowder said he could guard him as well. So it's far from ideal, I think, for Curry in this game, especially with Klay out. So I'm fine going him in tournaments only. The other injury news is Leandro Barbosa, I believe, is questionable with illness. So if Klay is out, Walton said that he would start Barbosa if Barbosa plays. If not, it would likely be Ian Clark. So their offense, their starting 5 downgrades pretty significantly if it's Clark and Rush in there. Those are 2 guys. I mean, I know Clark can hit those threes, but that makes it kind of easy for that D to kind of make sure Curry doesn't get those wide open shots. So because of all this, I'm pretty high. I'm not ready to call that the Warriors, this will be their first loss just because they're so tight in those close fourth quarter games. And Boston's a little bit inexperienced in that regard. So I do think Boston will definitely cover though. And then Draymond, is another guy I love in tournaments for this game. He's definitely expensive. He's 8,200 on DraftKings, 8,100 on FanDuel. But I like him in this fast-paced game. I really think he can kind of fill the stat sheet up in this one. And if Klay's out, he'll have to do more, really. And so he could end with a very large line in this game. And then, we got to bring up Klay. He's been playing really well on a 70% ankle going into tomorrow. I doubt he gets that extra 30%, really. Realistically, you got to think about that. So I'll have like a few shares if he's supposedly good to go, but I would just, I wouldn't get my hopes up or anything with his ankle doubtful at 100%. So And then, he'll probably have Avery Bradley on him for the game. So, and they just don't overcommit on help D. So Clay won't be like wide open like he has been lately. And then both teams can go small in this game, no problem. So I'm not really considering much tournament exposure to Bogut or Festus Swagzili as well. So Celtics side though, this isn't a horrible spot for them. Really overall, we got RJ Hunter is doubtful with a hip injury. So I think that opens up Evan Turner as a sneaky tournament play, just with a little bit more minutes. And I kind of like him against that second unit, so long as like Iggy's not wrapped up on him or anything. But I think he can kind of end with a decent line. And really everyone on this team is a tournament option for me. Isaiah is a tournament option because Golden State's really good at defending the three. They obviously have two solid rim defenders to kind of stop Isaiah on his drives. I would have some exposure to Isaiah, obviously. He's beaten tough matchups before and finished with pretty solid lines. Avery Bradley, I think, deserves some tournament exposure. I think Solinger deserves some tournament exposure. And again, Turner, if Hunter's ruled out, I think Golden State would be pretty thin in reserves if Clay and Barbosa are ruled out. So Turner has some upside here. He's been playing really well lately. Olynyk is somewhat intriguing because neither Bogut nor Ezeli will kind of chase him down on the perimeter. The main problem, obviously, with Olynyk is foul trouble. He got 5 fouls in just 20 minutes last game, but he definitely still gets his shots off. The volume is always there. So I think he's a really, really sneaky tournament play to have a few shares of in this game. Next game I got is the Bucks at Raptors. Raptors are favored by 8, and the total is 194. Bucks are just kind of spiraling downwards. Both these teams play a really, really slow pace. Milwaukee, the second slowest. Toronto, the fourth slowest. So this is not really a game to target or attack any of these guys a lot. Bayless remains sidelined for at least 2 weeks. Grievous Vasquez is questionable with an ankle injury. So that's kind of a big one to monitor for this game because OJ Mayo is kind of the only guy I'm leaning towards in cash, especially on FanDuel. He's 4,800. So if Vasquez is ruled out, it's kind of really difficult not to go Mayo. At shooting guard on FanDuel, you have to start 2. There's not a lot of value on this slate. So that's kind of a spot where you look at and you see Vasquez is out. Bayless obviously is already out. You kind of almost have to throw in there with the limited you can't really save money anywhere else. So, Mayo's been really solid lately. He's averaged 27.5 FanDuel points his last 4, playing huge minutes. And at 4,800, his implied total is only 16. So, I mean, he's great value. I would just, in this game, I would just kind of temper your expectations. This is a lot more of a difficult matchup for him than his previous games. But unfortunately, you got to save money somewhere, and I think Mayo is one of those guys if Vasquez is ruled out. The rest are all tournament plays really due to the low total, and they're 8-point underdogs on the road, really. So this isn't something you kind of want to target. Monroe has a really difficult matchup with Biyombo down low, who's a great rim defender. Giannis has been very inconsistent lately. Michael Carter-Williams is probably my favorite tournament play. He's coming off the best game of the season, I think, by far, 20 points, 11 assists versus the Clippers. His minutes have been pretty stable, around 30. So I don't mind having decent exposure to him at a cheap price, really. On the Raptors side, we got DeMarre Carroll is still out indefinitely with a bruised knee. Obviously, Valanciunas is still out, so Biyombo will draw the start again. And then Bebe Nogueira is questionable with a sprained left ankle, which hopefully he plays just so I can watch him. He really reminds me of a Brazilian Larry Sanders almost. So he's pretty awesome if you haven't had the opportunity to watch him. But lately, they had an 8-man rotation, the Raptors, against the Spurs. So, they're keeping things really thin. Obviously, Lowry and DeRozan are playing huge minutes. And then they kind of mix up the front court and, the wing. Like Terrence Ross didn't play as much, obviously. I'm pretty off him overall, honestly. That first game was kind of fluky, and you're kind of chasing points if you go back to him. James Johnson played only 16 minutes last game, even though they only played 8 guys. So you got Patrick Patterson went for 34 minutes, Corey Joseph 30, obviously Scola, Biyombo. So the the guy in cash that I would go if I went anyone is definitely Kyle Lowry. It's a pretty steep price, 8,900 on DraftKings, 9,200 on FanDuel, but his floor is so high that I think it's not horrible to go him in cash. I probably won't, just given the slate. There's some other guys right around there that I like a lot as well. So Milwaukee plays at a really slow pace, but they're bad defensively. So I see no problem that Lowry won't get his points. It's just kind of a matter of how you want to distribute your cap and if you want to spend up to get to that range kind of at point guard. Tournament-wise, I think you got to look at DeMar DeRozan a little bit. It's more of a tourney play always for me because of his lack of secondary assists. Although lately he has been getting decent amount of assists, which is really nice to see, but his steals are invisible in blocks. So really his upside is all about points, pretty much, and then some rebounds and assists. But it's someone I think you can have a few shares of in tournaments. And I'm not really on anyone else in this game. No one else really is going to, I don't think, put up a big enough line really to consider, Corey Joseph's upside's pretty capped. They kind of all are. So it's really just Lowry and DeRozan, the main part of their team. Next game I got is the Hornets at Grizzlies. Grizzlies are favored by 3.5. The total is 193.5. So we got another low total. I'm not really targeting anyone in this game either too much, just given that Hornets have been very solid defensively and Memphis is kind of picking their defense up. Injuries, Al Jefferson's still out with his calf injury, and then he actually got suspended 5 games additionally. I think he was like playing NBA 2K on the Xbox or something, just getting baked out of his mind, like watching the Hornets on the other TV, all disgusted that they're winning and playing so well because they finally have they don't have a ball stopper on offense down low anymore. So they can actually move the ball around now. So he's kind of just sitting there token up. So he's out for a bit, obviously, which is great for the only guy I'd really want to go in cash in this game, Nicholas Batum. 7,500 on both sites. It's not a great matchup. Tony Allen actually kind of looked like himself last game defensively, which we haven't really seen in a bit. So I don't love it or anything, but his assists and rebounds have been massive lately. He's been so consistent since Al Jeff's been out and he's even done it in tough matchups. They just keep getting these tough matchups really. So I think I prefer him more on FanDuel where you have to start 2 small forwards. And then, Memphis is really struggling defending the 3 still. So I think Batum is fairly safe here. And I think he's definitely a cash game option at a price you can kind of afford if you're not going to go LeBron or Durant or something at small forward. Tournament-wise, Kemba is only 7K on DraftKings. I don't think it's not awful to go him in cash there. I just kind of prefer him more as a tourney play. It's not like the best individual matchup, obviously, and he has to deal with Gasol around the rim. So he is getting a ton of steals lately, which really helps his value and his floor be pretty high. So I like him as a tourney option more, though, even though that's a very solid price on DraftKings. And then Marvin Williams, I don't mind a few tournament shares. He's 5,100 on FanDuel, so definitely affordable there. But his upside is just somewhat capped. I do think he'll have a matchup advantage with Zebo on him, just not being able to kind of defend on the perimeter. So I think there's sneaky upside here, but I'm not going to really have too many shares of him, even at that cheap price on FanDuel. And then Zeller, really the only other guy, and that's obviously a really tough matchup for him. So I expect him somewhere around the 16.5 points that he got against Whiteside last game. So not too high on him. Grizzlies side, again, this is tough. It's a low total. Charlotte has a good defense this year. I don't really like any Grizz guys out for cash outside of maybe Gasol. He's 7,400 on DraftKings. And I don't think he should have any problems really down low, and he's playing safe minutes. So he's someone to look at for cash. I think he's a fine cash game play. I just think you might want to explore other options kind of around that price point as well, just with maybe a higher total or a game where he's has a little bit more upside. And then tournament-wise, I think Zebo you can have some shares of, absolutely. He came through huge last game, so he still has that upside. His price is really cheap, and it's nice to see him playing this increase in minutes finally. So I like him quite a bit in tournaments. Have some shares. He's slightly risky in cash still, even though he does have a nice price. It's definitely generous, but I think he should be able to kind of have his way with this front court down low offensively. Conley, he's just not really playing enough minutes to kind of garner much tournament exposure. So kind of writing him off in both formats here in this game. And that's it for the Grizzlies. Next game I got is Wizards at Pelicans. This is the game we've been waiting for, obviously, on this slate especially. The Pelicans are favored by 3, which kind of surprised me with how bad they are, but the Wizards have been pretty bad too. And the total is a whopping 216, which is by far the highest total on this slate. Like, it's not even close. So I think it's really important to have exposure in this game for your cash lineups. Injuries on the Wizards side are same as they have been the last week or whatnot. Nene is not traveling with the team with a calf injury, so he's out for the next 4 games. And Drew Gooden, same thing, calf injury, not traveling with team, out 4 games. Chris Humphries is questionable with an ankle injury. So the guy I kind of like out of that news right there is Gortat, only 6K on DraftKings. And I think he was really overlooked the other night at a cheaper price, even with their front court decimated. He had 3 double-doubles in a row up to last game, obviously doubled again. So I think with Nene and Gooden already ruled out and Humphries questionable, that I like Gortat in this game kind of as a lock of solid minutes. And I prefer him on DK, obviously at 6K compared to 6.3 on FanDuel. And you get the double-double bonus, which is really nice. So he's a nice way to kind of get exposure to this game for someone with 4 double-doubles in a row. And then obviously, the strongest cash game play on the Wizards, as usual, is John Wall. I think you kind of almost have to go him on this slate, given this total of this game. Playing the Pelicans are still easily the worst team in defensive rating, worse than the Lakers, which I think says quite a bit. So I think he'll be able to kind of destroy this matchup. And with this high total, I think he'll end with a big line again. And then Beal, I think, is definitely a cash play as well. He's playing huge minutes. His price isn't great. That's kind of the main knock on him right now. That price isn't like really, really good value or anything for shooting guard, which kind of sometimes you either want to kind of save there or like pay Harden, who's not on this slate or whatnot, or Bledsoe or something, kind of another guy. So his price isn't fantastic. And, he's coming off a bad game, but I think it's really important to kind of almost forget that. I mean, focus on the matchup. Obviously, he was in a good matchup last game too, but just realize that it's kind of unlikely that he has 2 bad games in a row with great matchups and similar things going for him, super high total. I'm pretty neutral on playing him personally in cash games due to price and kind of lack of value options. I'd rather almost kind of maybe go Mayo or something at shooting guard and kind of spend elsewhere. But he's definitely a strong play regardless, and one that if you're not going in cash, definitely deserves some tournament exposure. And then more of a tournament play really is Otto Porter. We saw with Gortat back last game, he played 29 minutes compared to 36 in each of his last 3. So he's someone I'm kind of writing off, but he's still capable of having a good line. And in this game, again, this is a huge game, by far the juiciest game in the slate. So I don't mind having some exposure to him in tournaments as well. On the Pelican side, team was an absolute mess. The backcourt last game against the Celtics, Tariq Evans and Eric Gordon scored 0 points in the entire game, which is, pretty shocking. Obviously, Clay and Curry are a step up, but again, it kind of speaks to the Boston. They're a great defensive team. So even with the Pelicans kind of they are projected to score more than anyone on the slate, it's really, really difficult to kind of go anyone on this team in cash. I mean, obviously you got Anthony Davis, who's the clear guy that you want, but he's really expensive and there are not a lot of value plays. So I don't know if having these guys that are dirt cheap and might really kill your team just so you can pay for Anthony Davis is the best way to go. I don't like fading him in this game with this total, but it's just really difficult to fit him as all. He's obviously a cash play, and a tournament play in consideration in both formats. But I'll probably lean a little bit maybe more balanced unless there's some news kind of that comes out tomorrow that opens up a few cheaper guys. Drew is really cheap right now, and but he won't see more than 25 minutes, so it's kind of tough to go him, even though he's produced very solid in 3 straight. It's just it just seems a little bit risky for me to take a guy who's won't play more than 25 minutes. Even though he is hitting value, so I guess you can take a chance on him. I think he's a fine tournament play because not really because of his upside. He can get like 30 or whatnot, but I think at that price point, you save a lot of money there, and it kind of will create unique lineups and you can spend elsewhere. So I do like him for tournaments, and he's not a horrible cash play. I think he'll show up pretty high in models because he's been producing in his cheap price. Tariq started off hot his first 3 games of this season, but obviously he was held scoreless against the Celtics, so it's kind of tough. He's not cheap or anything, but he is in a great spot here. So I do like him kind of in both formats. I think just to kind of get exposure to this game on this side of the game. So, he's not horrible in cash. Again, it's kind of difficult to pay that price for him, but I think he's in a really good spot here with this total and kind of a fast-paced game for him to put up a pretty solid line. Tournament-wise, Ryan Anderson is kind of on fire. He's getting a ton of shots off lately. Been very consistent. Like looking through his game log, you'd think he's 6,100 on DraftKings. You'd kind of be like, what? He's cash game viable, really. But I think he's more of a secondary cash option and not a strong one, just because he could shoot poor and then you're kind of screwed. So I prefer him obviously on DK if you're going to go him at 6,100. He's not a cash target I'm really jumping at, but given this game being so much better than any other one, it's not the worst play to kind of go Rhino in cash. He's getting guaranteed minutes and he's getting a high volume of shots and he's hitting value every game. So, and then Eric Gordon, I think it's obviously way too risky to play in cash, but I think he'll have really low ownership percentage in tournaments, especially coming off that last game. So I think he's kind of a sneaky tournament play, just getting exposure to this game. Another thing to mention, I almost forgot, is that it's Star Wars night here, which is really important to note for this game because we got some Galactic Empire fans playing in this game. So, load up on this game, Star Wars night. May the Force be with you. I think this is going to be a huge total. So tournaments and cash, I think it'll be interesting to see the percentages owned for a lot of these guys given the slate dynamics and the pricing. Let's move on to the next game. I got the Wolves at the Nuggets, and I got to pick them right now. The total is 202. Injuries for the Wolves is Pekovic is out still. Kevin Martin is probable with a bruised wrist. He scores 30. I wish it was broken. I don't trust those x-rays. He scores 37 every time he breaks his wrist. Like, if I were Sam Mitchell, I would just give him a hairline fracture every 2 weeks or something. Like, it's not that difficult, really. So I don't see why they don't do that all the time. Cash-wise, though, this is a good game. Denver's really bad defensively. I know it's in Denver, so a little bit tougher than usual you think facing Denver, but I think Karl Anthony Towns is obviously in a great spot here. It was really good to see him go 35 minutes last game finally. So I love him in this spot, assuming he gets solid enough minutes. He's just 7K on DraftKings and 7,200 on FanDuel. So it's a really easy matchup. There's nothing challenging about Denver's front court. So he's a guy I'm really strongly looking at for cash in this game, assuming that he's got those safe minutes. And then Ricky Rubio, I think I'm leaning more cash overall. 7K on DraftKings, 7,100 on FanDuel. His implied points is 27. He's averaged just under 37 his last 3. And, he's facing a point guard who's probably having the worst statistical season in the NBA of all time. So, I think he'll get a lot of steals here. I think he'll get a lot of assists. He's still struggling to score, which it's kind of just how he is his career. But I think assists and steals wise, he'll make up for it. Carries a pretty safe floor here, and I think a lot of upside going against Moutier. So I like him in cash at at 7K still. Tournament-wise, I got Wiggins here, who you just can't go in cash right now. He's not producing at all lately, but I still do like his upside, especially in this game. So I think some tournament shares where most people kind of be on Cat and Rubio, going Wiggins is kind of a contrarian move to, maybe he could go off this game and just score a ton. So I like that play in tournaments. And then Kevin Martin, that's something I wouldn't really chase those points. I think you can have some tournament exposure because Denver's incapable of defending the perimeter. So I just wouldn't – unless he breaks his hand, tonight or something, then I wouldn't have too much exposure to him. On the Nuggets side, we got a lot – this injury report is really large, so make sure you stay updated with our Twitter account throughout the day. We got Gallo is probable with a knee injury. Fareed is probable. Jameer Nelson is probable. Darrell Arthur is questionable. Gary Harris, I believe, is probable coming back from his concussion. And then King Joffrey Laverne is probable. He was active last game, even though he's suffering from an illness, but he got a DNP CD. So we'll check that status. The front court really is just kind of a mess. At least the center position is with Hickson, Joff, and Jokic. So really, I'll assume everyone who is probable is playing. So that's Gallo, Fareed, Jameer, and Gary Harris even too. So you kind of got to go into this game looking at these probable guys is that they are playing and not really get your hopes up that one of them sits and creates extra value. I think Darrell Arthur is kind of the guy I'll be keeping my eye on a lot as he's questionable with the knee injury, because Fareed, I think, would get a pretty solid bump if Arthur's out, especially playing at home. The front court situation's really difficult to predict center-wise, so I'll leave that alone in cash. But Fareed is borderline cash for me. He's just 5,900 on DraftKings compared to 6,300 on FanDuel. So if Arthur's out, Fareed's been pretty consistent and usually plays much better at home. Tournament-wise, I think Gallo, 6,900 and on DraftKings, 7K on FanDuel. It's not a great price point or anything. He's playing huge minutes as of late. I think he's more of a solid tournament option than cash, even in this game overall. And then Will Barton, arguably the best player on the Nuggets this year. In my opinion, he has been for sure. 6,200 on DraftKings, only 5,900 on FanDuel. So I prefer him there where you got to start two shooting guards. I prefer him as a tournament play, just assuming Gary Harris is finally back from a concussion. It just adds one more body there with Foy and Harris and Barton kind of on the wing, making it a little bit risky, a little too risky, I think, for me in cash. But he's been playing really well and getting consistent minutes off the bench still. So he's definitely got some upside at a fairly favorable price on this slate too. So next game I got is Thunder at Jazz. Thunder favored by 2.5, and total is 204. So Thunder on a back-to-back, traveling to the altitude in Salt Lake isn't like ideal for me or anything, but this is still a really high total and a really close spread. So Durant, Westbrook, and Ibaka all had huge lines tonight, Thursday night versus the Hawks. So, Thunder are definitely clicking right now. Durant's playing out of his mind. Shooting percentage is just scary to look at, really. And he did just record a massive triple-double. So cash-wise, again, it's Durant, Westbrook you got to look at. It is back-to-back in altitude, so I will probably fade them both, just knowing that it is back-to-back, and it's really hard to pay up for these guys on this slate. So there's still cash options, obviously. It's a high implied total for the Thunder, and really it's just these two that are going to do most of the scoring. So obviously they're still going to get theirs. I like the matchup probably a little bit more for Westbrook if I had to choose one of the two. But again, Durant is just playing out of his mind. So I like both. The real knock is, the altitude, the back-to-back, and the Jazz play at the slowest pace in the league. So that enough is kind of where I'm kind of writing them off in cash personally. But if you go them, I still think they're going to get their points. It's just kind of a little bit of risk for me. And combined with salary difficulties fitting them in is really what makes me off them. Tournament-wise, obviously Westbrook and Durant are great tournament plays, knowing that this is a close spread, high total. Ibaka had a huge game tonight, and he's got Lyles on him, so I think that's definitely a beatable matchup for him. I think tournament exposure to him is solid. And then Enes Kanter on the back-to-back may end up seeing a few more minutes to kind of give the starters some rest, possibly. So I think he's an option only on DK, really, where you get that double-double bonus, because it's kind of what you're expecting if you go Kanter in tournaments, is for him to get that double-double. Definitely a few shares of him, though, overall. On the Jazz side, Rudy Gobert remains out with a D injury, so it's Favors starting at the 5 and most likely Lyles starting at the 4 again. He actually played pretty well last game overall. Cash-wise for this, I think Thunder team on a back-to-back, and they're not the greatest defensive team as is, so I like taking a strong look at Gordon Hayward here. He's just on fire lately. Very, very consistent right now. High total, close spread, so I think he's a cash game option at $7K on both sites. At small forward, I think it's a good way to kind of save money. Whereas that's a big step down price-wise from Durant, so I think it gives you kind of a good security at small forward and a good way to kind of fit in other guys at that similar price on your team on the slate. So I like Hayward for cash, and Favors probably leans a bit more towards tournament. I personally, I think I'm higher on Favors than a lot of people in general, so I wouldn't mind him in cash at 7,900 on DraftKings. I really like him a lot with Gobert out overall. So Oklahoma City is a really good rebounding team, though. So it kind of puts him a little bit more on that tournament side. And then the true tournament options for me on this team are Trey Burke and Alec Burks, both coming off the bench, going against a pretty poor second unit with Oklahoma City's bench. They've shown upside lately, and we'll see an uptick in pace, which I think suits both of them well. So they make for decent tournament options. I won't have too much exposure because the upside isn't anything insane, but I think they can definitely pay off their pretty cheap prices here. Next game we got is probably the worst game of the slate. Lakers at Spurs. Spurs are favored by 14.5, which is huge, and the total is 194. So obviously a horrible spot for the Lakers. We don't really need to break that down, how difficult this matchup is for them defensively. I tried to think of any way that the Lakers could keep this game somewhat close at San Antonio, and I just can't really. So they're all really easy fades for cash. Kobe might shoot 0 for 26. I wouldn't be surprised at all this game. Last game he deferred at the end of the game to the youngins and sat out the end of the fourth quarter and overtime. He should just defer the entire season if he really wanted to help this team, but that obviously won't happen. But Jordan Clarkson is questionable with an ankle injury, though, which kind of is a interesting spot for the Lakers. You're still not going to go anyone in cash, but if Clarkson is ruled out, I don't mind some D'Angelo Russell in tournaments at all. It's going to be interesting to see what Byron does if this game is decidedly over kind of halfway through the third quarter, like it probably will be. If he's going to let Russell and Randall play majority of the fourth quarter, even in a blowout, since they're off the bench, kind of just let him run. Knowing him, he probably won't, but that's something I think you want to kind of break down and monitor, because that makes me kind of like both Russell and Randall. Really, they're the only two guys I kind of like in tournaments anyways, but with Clarkson out, I think Russell gains a pretty big boost for tournament value if they end up playing in this blowout kind of in that fourth quarter off the bench. I'm not really looking at anyone else. Lou Williams just kind of be chasing points from last game. Difficult matchup. I just don't see him really doing anything against this team. Spurs side, usually the guy I recommend for cash is always Kawhi, but last game was pretty tough. Kawhi, I think, is my favorite player in the league, outside of maybe Mario Hezonja, obviously, and then Philly cheesesteaks are my favorite food. So that situation was horrible. Whose side am I on there? Who am I rooting for bounce back stronger. Like I don't want to give up Phillies, but look at what it did to Kawhi. It was just brutal. He looked as bad as I've probably ever seen him play. So I'm off him in cash just on that off chance. I mean, who knows if that Philly is still lingering? Like we don't even know where he got it from, or at least I don't now. But it's just scary if he just went to not a good place in Philly, which he shouldn't have done. So for him, I think it's a little risky though. Really, with that lingering illness, he looked so bad, and just the spread being 14.5, I don't think you can really afford to take Kawhi, even though he is the safest of the bunch with a very easy matchup. I do still think his floor is high, but you add the illness risk and the blowout factor. This is the first leg of a back-to-back for the Spurs as well, so I don't think it's anything you really want to target here. And I think you can kind of fade this game generally overall. Clarkson, Russell, Randall in tournaments, some shares, and tournament-wise on the Spurs side, I think Kawhi is a fine tournament play. He can get that 5 for 5 if he's perfectly healthy and against this awful team. Turn the ball over a lot. I think a few shares of Aldridge and Duncan are okay, but just keep in mind it's the first leg of back-to-back, and Spurs are just so deep that even if you do think that the starters are done and halfway through the third or end of the third, like Patty Mills, but they got McCallum. They got guys. They have a ton of bodies that I don't think anyone will really crush value on this team. And even if they do, it's going to be really difficult to predict who on that second unit. So I think you can kind of fade this game overall. So last game we got, Blazers at Suns. Pretty juicy game to close on. Don't overlook this one. Suns are favored by 4, and the total is 209, which is really nice for this slate. Cash-wise on the Blazers, start with Lillard. I think for sure is a cash option. 8,800 on DraftKings. It's 500 cheaper than FanDuel, so it's not the best price or anything, but this is an uptick in pace for him, which I like a lot. The Suns play at the fastest pace in the league. Lillard's floor remains really, really high. So, I like him in cash still. It's really safe. If you're playing like a bunch of 50-50s and double-ups, you could certainly spend your money worse than on Lillard, was a really high floor for you and very, very safe, especially in this game, the high total, fast pace. The other guy I kind of like in cash quite a bit is CJ McCollum. Again, I don't think I'll go him just at that price point. He's 6,900 on DraftKings, which for a guy you think that just mainly scores isn't great. This is a great total though. So it depends what the Mayo situation is with Vasquez kind of for your shooting guard spot. McCollum kind of he does save you some money at 6,900, a little bit compared to some other options. His volume is really high shots. He's getting his shots off, and he's getting a crazy amount of steals lately, which is really bumping his value up a lot. And the Suns' backcourt, they turn it over all the time, and the Suns as a team have the third most turnovers in the league. So I think that will continue. I think McCollum will get his shots off. He'll make enough, and he'll get enough steals and scatter a few rebounds and assists in there. I think he'll hit value. I think he's pretty safe here, but it kind of depends on your roster construction of are you going to pay that much for your shooting guard. Really for cash, that's kind of obviously that's pretty much their main team is Lillard and McCollum. Tournament-wise, really the only guy I'm looking at who I think is pretty sneaky is Ed Davis, just because he's a really good points per minute guy, and he's a guy who can get you a double-double off the bench. I think this is a game where he could see additional minutes, just kind of match up better. So a few shares of him, really low shares though, obviously, and really mainly it's just Lillard and McCollum, who also make good tournament plays if you're not going to go them in cash, which is fine, not being able to afford them. On the Sun side, we got, Markieff is questionable with an illness still, and even if he's back, he's still in the doghouse. So it's a very interesting situation to monitor if we learn anything new tomorrow. Tyson Chandler is, I think, expected to return from his hamstring injury. So really the value, Alex Len, John Lure, and even Teletovic as a tourney play will obviously largely depend on the status of Markieff and Chandler. So that's something that we'll monitor for you, but we might not know in time. Hopefully we have some more news before lineups lock. This is just a really late game on the slate. So unfortunately, it's kind of risky to kind of put Len in there. I would make my lineups in the morning and kind of midday without him. And then in the chance that Chandler is out, then you can kind of pivot to Len where it's a great spot. He's coming off a huge game. I think 20 points, 14 rebounds. So his price went up a little, but he's still on this slate. It's huge to save money, and he's a great spot. But assuming Chandler's back, you can't go Len. And then if Markieff plays, it's a little trickier even, especially with Chandler back to go Lure again as well. So it's a tough spot for that front court. Being that it's a late slate, I wouldn't really bank on any of these guys offering much value, really. The front court, that is. Cash-wise for the Suns, I love Brandon Knight. 7,700 on DraftKings, 7,900 FanDuel. I like both personally. And then Bledsoe, 8,300 on DraftKings, 8,600 on FanDuel. So a bit more, but he is at shooting guard. So I like both these guys a lot. They're obviously great cash game plays. Portland's backcourt is not really solid defensively. And then, that's pretty much it for the Suns. I think, I wouldn't really overlook this game. This is the second highest total, so I like getting some exposure here, whether it's really all the backcourt, Lillard, McCollum, Knight, and Bledsoe, and it's just kind of a matter of fitting them in, kind of going the cheapest route, honestly, given this slate. So, that's it. The 11-game slate came and went just like that. I think overall it's a pretty tough slate, given the lack of value. So I think it's wise to kind of go a more well-balanced lineup overall, as there aren't really any cheap guys that I feel super comfortable about having in my lineup. It's certainly not really a stars and scrubs type night. It's kind of, you got to fit in the value where you can at positions that are maybe a little bit more thin. You might want to spend up and kind of take a few chances at guys that are those mid-range price. I mean, look at a guy like Batum, I think is solid. Hayward at 7K. There are a few spots where guys, you don't really need to take the top price guy at that position. And there's kind of a lot of middle value on this slate. So I think that's probably the best way to go at on this slate overall. But good luck tomorrow, everyone. Justin and Brian will be back with a pod on Sunday to break down Monday's slate. Good luck, everyone. I'll see you guys next Tuesday.